right, this is lesson 9.1, equivalent fractions. Our learning goal is to learn how to write equivalent fractions. Here's our vocabulary. Equivalent fractions are fractions that name the same part of a whole, region, length, or set. An example would be 1/2 is equivalent to 2/4. Non-zero. You can use any number, just not 0. Go ahead and write these down, and when you are finished writing these down, you can press play and we'll move on. Here's our learning goal. Write this down too. The same fractional amount can be represented by an infinite set of different but equivalent fractions. Equivalent fractions are found by multiplying or dividing the numerator and the denominator by the same non-zero number. Just remember, we can't use 0, any number but 0. And equivalent means equal, so we're finding fractions that maybe have different numbers on the top and the bottom, but they represent the same ratio, the same set. They are equal. They can be reduced or put down into lowest terms to mean the same fraction. Here's an example. The identity property of multiplication states that you can multiply a number by 1 and not change its value. For this reason, when 1 is written as a fraction, such as 3/3 or 5/5, and then multiplied with another number, the value remains the same. So fractionally, anytime the top number and the bottom number are the same, that represents one whole. So here we have 2/3. 2/3, if you multiplied that by 4/4, would be 8/12. Well, 8/12 could then be reduced or divided by 4 back to 2/3. Here's another example. Fractions that have the same value are called equivalent fractions. You can also divide the numerator and the denominator of a fraction by the same non-zero number to find the equivalent fraction. So 12/15 could be divided by 3. Here we see 12/15 divided by 3/3 equals 4/5, because 12 divided by 3 is 4 and 15 divided by 3 is 5. Here's practice problem number 1. It wants you to write 2 fractions that are equivalent to the one fraction given. So go back to the examples and see if you can figure out how to make 2/4 into an equivalent fraction. When you have 2 equivalent fractions, just remember there's an infinite number of equivalent fractions you could have, but you only need to write 2. When you have 2, turn this on and see if you did the same thing that I did. Now your answer might not be the same as mine, but I'm going to take the problem, the fraction, 2/4, and I'm going to multiply it by 2. 2 halves, okay? And then I would get 4/8. 4/8 is an equivalent fraction to 2/4. I could also take 2/4 and multiply it by 3/3. And I would get 6/12. Now notice that 6/12, 4/8, and 2/4 all mean the same thing. They're all equivalent fractions. So I could say my equivalent fractions are 2/4, 4/8, and 6/12. Let's move on. Practice problem number 2. Write 2 fractions that are equivalent to the one fraction given. Here I have 24/48. Now I could multiply 24/48 by the same top and bottom numbers, but I could also divide. Since we multiplied in the last problem, let's divide in this problem. So I have 24/48, and I could divide that by 2 halves. Remember, I have to keep my top number and my bottom number the same when I'm making equivalent fractions for multiplying or dividing it. Well, I could do 24 divided by 2 is 12, and 48 divided by 2 is 24. So 12/24 represents the same value, or is equivalent to 24/48. I could take my same fraction, 24/48, and divide that by 12. Let's divide it by 12 twelfths. 24 divided by 12 is 2, and 48 divided by 12 is 4. So 2/4, again, is equivalent or represents the same value as 12 24ths, which is equivalent to 24 48ths. If I wanted to go ahead and take this fraction to lowest terms, I would multiply this again, or I'm sorry, I would divide it again by 2 halves. 2 will go into 2 one time, and 4 will go into 2 two times. So my lowest fraction, my fraction in lowest terms for all three of these, my lowest equivalent fraction would be 1/2. So we could say, here instead of writing 2, I wrote 3, but we could say that 12 24ths and 2 4ths and even 1/2 are all equivalent fractions. They're all equal the same amount. Let's move on. Here we have practice problem number 3. Write two fractions that are equivalent to the one fraction given. Here we have 10 35ths. This time, let's try to write an equivalent fraction by multiplying, and then let's try to write an equivalent fraction by dividing. So here we have 10 35ths. I'm going to rewrite that 10 35ths, and I'm going to multiply that by 2 halves to get the equivalent fraction. 10 times 2 is 20. Oops. And 35 times 2, I'm going to have to go over to the side here. Two times 5 is 10, carry the 1, bring down the 0. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So 35 times 2 is 70, and I have 20 70ths. That's one equivalent fraction. And then let's try by dividing. I have 10 35ths, and I could divide that by 5/5, which is 1 whole. 10 divided by 5 is 2. 35 divided by 5 is 7. In this case, that's also my lowest terms fraction, but it's equivalent. 10 35ths is the same as 20 70ths, is the same or equal to 2 7ths. All of those are equivalent fractions. We found the first one by multiplying and the second one by dividing, but they equal the same fractional part. Let's move on. Here's a practice word problem. Jenna claims that no matter how many equivalent fractions are found for any fraction, she can always find one more. Is she right? Well, yes, she is. Jenna is right because there are an finite amount of numbers she could use to represent one whole and multiply by. Multiply her original fraction.
Thanks so very much.
All right, let's move on. So now you need to challenge yourself. There are 206 bones in the human body. The fraction 54 over 206 represents 206. I'm sorry, did I say an and in there? The fraction 54 over 206 represents the number of bones in both hands compared to the total number of bones in the body. Write an equivalent fraction. Show all your work in your journal explain your answer, and come back to school ready to check your answer. We are finished up. Review your learning goals. Have you mastered all of them? Do you need to go back and review and practice again? In your journal, write down if you are at a 1, 2, or 3 in your learning. And if you have any questions, write them down in your journal. If you don't have any questions, you do not have to write anything down, and I'll see you tomorrow with your work done and ready to learn.